Hakim, the Masked Dyer of Merv, by Jorge Luis Borges. Unless I am mistaken, the original sources of information on Al-Mokana, the Veiled, or more strictly Masked, Prophet of Khorasan, are but four. A. The excerpts from the History of the Caliphs, preserved by Baladuri. B. The Manual of the Giant, or Book of Precision and Revision, by the official historian of the Abbasids, Ibn Abi Tahir Tarfur. C. The Arabic codex entitled The Annihilation of the Rose, which refutes the abominable heresies of the Rosa Obscura, or Rosa Secreta, which was the Prophet's holy work. And D. Several coins, without portraits, unearthed by an engineer named Andrusov on ground that had been leveled for the Trans-Caspian Railway. These coins were deposited in the Numismatic Museum in Tehran. They contain Persian distichs which summarize or correct certain passages from the Annihilation. The original Rosa has apparently been lost, since the manuscript found in 1899 and published not without haste by the Morgenlandisches Archiv was declared by Horn and later by Sir Percy Sykes to be apocryphal. The fame of the prophet in the West is owed to Thomas More's garrulous poem Lalla Rookh, a work laden with the Irish conspirators' sighs and longings for the East. The Scarlet Dye. In the year 120 of the Hegira, or 736 of the Christian era, there was born in Turkestan the man Hakim, whom the people of that time and that region were to call the Veiled. His birthplace was the ancient city of Merv, whose gardens and vineyards and lawns look out sadly onto the desert. Noontime there, when not obscured by choking clouds of sand that leave a film of whitish dust on the black clusters of the grapes, is white and dazzling. Hakim was raised in that wearied city. We know that one of his father's brothers trained him as a dyer, the craft known to be a refuge for infidels and impostors and inconstant men, which inspired the first anathemas of his extravagant career. "My face is of gold," a famous page of the Annihilation says, "but I have steeped the purple dye, and on the second night have plunged the uncarded wool into it, and on the third night have saturated the prepared wool, and the emperors of the islands still contend for that bloody cloth. Thus did I sin in the years of my youth, deforming the true colors of the creatures. The angel would tell me that lambs were not the color of tigers, while Satan would say to me that the all-powerful one desired that they be, and in that pursuit he employed my cunning and my dye. Now I know that neither the angel nor Satan spoke the truth, for I know that all color is abominable." In the year 146 of the Hegira, Hakim disappeared from his native city. The vats and barrels in which he had immersed the cloth were broken, as were a scimitar from Shiraz and a brass mirror. The Bull. At the end of the moon of Sha'ban in the year 158, the air of the desert was very clear, and a group of men were looking toward the west in expectation of the moon of Ramadan, which inspires fasting and mortification. They were slaves, beggars, horse sellers, camel thieves, and butchers. Sitting gravely on the ground before the gate of an inn at which caravans stopped on the road to Merv, they awaited the sign. They looked at the setting sun, and the color of the setting sun was the color of the sand. From far out on the dizzying desert, whose sun gives men fever and whose moon brings on convulsions, they saw three figures, apparently of immense height, coming toward them. The three figures were human, but the one in the center possessed the head of a bull. As these figures came closer, the man in the center was seen to be wearing a mask, while the two men that accompanied him were blind. Someone, as in the tales of the 1001 Nights, asked the reason for this wonder. "They are blind," the masked man said, "because they have looked upon my face." The leopard. The historian of the Abbasids relates that the man from the desert, whose voice was extraordinarily sweet, or so, in contrast to the harshness of the mask, it seemed to be, told the men that though they were awaiting the sign of a month of penitence, he would be for them a greater sign, the sign of an entire life of penitence, and a calumniated death. He told them that he was Hakim, son of Osman, and that in the year 146 of the flight, a man had entered his house, and after purifying himself and praying, had cut his, Hakim's, head off with a scimitar and taken it up to the heavens. Born in the right hand of this visitor, who was the angel Gabriel, his head had been taken before the Almighty, who had bade him prophesy, entrusting him with words of such antiquity that speaking them burned one's mouth, and endowed one with such glorious resplendence that mortal eyes could not bear to look upon it. That was the reason for his mask. When every man on earth professed the new law, the visage would be unveiled to them, and they would be able to worship it without danger, as the angels did already. His message delivered, Hakim exhorted the men to jihad, a holy war, and the martyrdom that accompanied it. The slaves, beggars, horse sellers, camel thieves, and butchers denied him their belief. One voice cried, "Sorcerer!" Another, "Impostor!" Someone had brought a leopard, perhaps a member of that lithe and bloodthirsty breed trained by Persian huntsmen. At any rate, it broke free of its cage. Save for the masked prophet and his two acolytes, all the men there trampled one another in their haste to flee. When they returned, the beast was blind. In the presence of those luminous dead eyes, the men worshipped Hakim and admitted his supernatural estate. The Veiled Prophet. The official historian of the Abbasids narrates with no great enthusiasm the inroads made by Hakim the Veiled in Khorasan. That province, greatly moved by the misfortune and crucifixion of its most famous leader, embraced with desperate fervor the doctrine offered by the shining visage, and offered up to him its blood and gold. Hakim by now had exchanged his harsh mask for a fourfold veil of white silk, embroidered with precious stones. Black was the symbolic color of the caliphs of the House of Abbas. Hakim chose the color white, the most distant from it, for his shielding veil, his banners, and his turbans. The campaign began well. It is true that in the Book of Precision it is the caliph's pennants that are victorious everywhere, but since the most frequent result of those victories is the stripping of the generals of their rank and the abandonment of impregnable castles, it is not difficult for the sagacious reader to read between the lines. Toward the end of the moon of Rajab in the year 161, the famous city of Nishapur opened its iron gates to the masked one. In early 162, the city of Astarabad did likewise. Hakim's military operations, like those of another, more fortunate prophet, were limited to his tenor chanting of prayers, offering up to the deity from the hump of a reddish-colored camel in the chaotic heart of battle. Arrows would whistle all around him, yet he was never wounded. He seemed to seek out danger. The night, a band of loathsome lepers surrounded his palace. He had them brought to him. He kissed them, and he made them gifts of gold and silver. The prophet delegated the wearying details of governing to 6 or 7 adepts. He was a scholar of meditation and of peace. A harem of 114 blind wives accompanied to satisfy the needs of his divine body. Abominable mirrors. So long as their words do not altogether contravene orthodox belief, confidential friends of God are tolerated by Islam, however indiscreet or threatening to that religion they may be. The Prophet would perhaps not have spurned the advantages of that neglect, but his followers, his victories, and the public wrath of the Caliph, whose name was Muhammad al-Mahdi, forced him into heresy. It was that descent that ruined him, though first it led him to set down the articles of a personal religion that bore the clear influence of Gnostic forebears. In the beginning of Hakim's cosmogony, there was a spectral god, a deity as majestically devoid of origins as of name and face. This deity was an immutable god, but its image threw 9 shadows. These, condescending to action, endowed and ruled over a first heaven. From that first demiurgic crown there came a second, with its own angels, powers, and thrones, and these in turn founded another lower heaven, which was the symmetrical duplicate of the first. This second conclave was reproduced in a third, and the third in another lower enclave, and so on, to the number of 999. The Lord of the nethermost heaven, the shadow of shadows of yet other shadows, is he who reigns over us, and his fraction of divinity tends to 0. The earth we inhabit is an error, an incompetent parody. Mirrors and paternity are abominable because they multiply and affirm it. Revulsion, disgust, is the fundamental virtue, and 2 rules of conduct between which the Prophet left men free to choose lead us to it: abstinence and utter licentiousness, the indulgence of the flesh or the chastening of it. Hakim's paradise and hell were no less desperate. To those who deny the word, to those who deny the jeweled veil in the visage, runs an imprecation from the Rosa Secreta, I vow a wondrous hell. For each person who so denies shall reign over 999 empires of fire, and in each empire shall be 999 mountains of fire, and upon each mountain there shall be 999 towers of fire, and each tower shall have 999 stories of fire, and each story shall have 999 beds of fire, and in each bed shall that person be, and 999 kinds of fire, each with its own face and voice, shall torture that person throughout eternity. Another passage corroborates this. Here in this life dost thou suffer one body, in death and retribution thou shalt have bodies innumerable. Paradise was less concrete. It is always night, and there are fountains of stone, and the happiness of that paradise is the special happiness of farewells, of renunciation, and of those who know that they are sleeping. The visage. In the 163rd year of the Hegira, the 5th of the shining face, Hakim was surrounded in Sanam by the Caliph's army. Great were the provisions, many the martyrs, and aid from a horde of angels of light was expected at any moment. Such was the pass to which they had come when a terrifying rumor spread through the castle. It was said that as an adulteress within the harem was being strangled by the eunuchs, she had screamed that the 3rd finger was missing from the Prophet's right hand, and that his other fingers had no nails. The rumor spread like fire among the faithful. In broad daylight, standing upon a high terrace, Hakim prayed to his familiar god for victory, or for a sign, servilely, with their heads bowed, as though they were running against the rain. 2 captains snatched away the gem-embroidered veil. First there came a trembling. The promised face of the apostle, the face which had journeyed to the heavens, was indeed white, but it was white with the whiteness of leprosy. It was so swollen, or so incredible, that it seemed to be a mask. It had no eyebrows. The lower eyelid of the right eye drooped upon the senile cheek. The dangling cluster of nodular growths was eating away its lips. The flat and inhuman nose resembled that of a lion. Hakim's voice attempted one final deception. "Thy abominable sins forbid thee to look upon my radiance, he began. No one was listening. He was riddled with spears.